Okay, so we're back and ready to really dig into all that was taken. This time, it's part 1 of Chapter 11, Nothing Left to Say, and let me tell you, that title is not messing around.
No, not at all. This section is heavy.
We're going deep on the transformations, motivations, and fates of 4 guys, Bryan, Rosendo, Ian, and Mike.
These are the ones who really show us the brutal reality of the island and what it can do to a person, especially after what went down before.
Right, we're seeing the fallout of those past decisions play out in a big way.
Yeah, it's like the island's deciding to settle some scores.
Let's start with Bryan. Remember how Chapter 10 ended?
Oh, man, with Rosendo locking him out of the bunker? Intense.
All that was taken is really clear that that was the spark for Bryan's, well, for his whole quest for revenge.
It's like that betrayal flipped a switch in him. And the way he starts to see the island.
It's not just a place he has to survive anymore, is it?
No, it's like he almost sees it as something he can use. There's this line in the text about the power dynamics of the blue corruption, granting control over nature. And Bryan seems to be buying into that. Like, his transformation is the key to being on top.
It's chilling, especially when you see how he interacts with Ian.
Oh, man, Ian. He's trapped by those roots, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty visceral image. Like,
Mm.
Ian's begging Bryan for help. You just feel his terror.
And Bryan just nothing.
Ice cold.
You have to wonder if, in this kind of environment, empathy just becomes a liability, a luxury you can't afford.
Bryan's so laser-focused on Rosendo that nothing else even matters.
Right. All he can see is payback.
Really highlights Bryan's obsession with Rosendo's fear. Like he's getting off on it.
And Rosendo, well, he's still clearly messed up from whatever happened to him in that bunker back in Chapter 10. Remember how he bolted out of there?
Oh, yeah. So when they finally face off, Rosendo tries to use a creature as a shield.
What a terrible miscalculation. Talk about desperate.
It backfires spectacularly. Rosendo ends up crushed by that same bunker door he used to lock Bryan out.
It's rough, but it's also like poetic justice, you know? Like the island itself is delivering some karmic payback. Definitely emphasizes that theme of retribution and the island's unforgiving nature.
Yeah, actions have consequences. No escaping that.
And Bryan's reaction is interesting. He's not just satisfied, it's something more. He actually feels connected to whatever's behind that bunker door. Calls it a kindred entity.
Like he's found someone or something that gets him. It's scary.
Bryan descending into a darker alliance. It's a step beyond revenge, almost like he's joining forces with this dark power.
The chapter ends with him weighing his options. Does he offer Ian a place? Help the creature? Go into the bunker alone?
Each path leads him further down this dark road. It makes you wonder if he can ever go back.
Okay, so that's Bryan. What about Rosendo? This is pretty much where his story ends.
Yeah, it's a tragic ending, but it fits with his character arc. You know, throughout the story, Rosendo was always cautious, analytical, all about self-preservation. Almost like he thought he could outsmart the island.
He was so detached.
Yeah.
Always observing, but never really engaging.
And that's what makes his final moments so powerful. Whatever he saw in the bunker, it stripped away all that intellectual distance. He went from the observer to the one being observed.
You can really feel his terror and trying to use that creature. It was a last-ditch effort to survive, and it just didn't work.
It highlights how limited intellect can be in the face of raw power. Sometimes there's just no clever solution, no way to outthink your way out.
All that was taken talks about the tragic irony of Rosendo's death. He regrets not facing things head-on, not working with Bryan. But it's too little, too late.
It's that classic what-if moment, but on the island, those what-ifs can be deadly.
Okay, let's move on to Ian and Mike. Ian's situation is, well,
Yeah.
he's trapped by the roots. A visceral manifestation of the island's power. Like it's a punishment for his passivity, for always playing it safe.
It's the opposite of Bryan's transformation. Ian's trapped, powerless, and he's forced to watch everything unfold between Bryan and Rosendo.
Really hits on the inadequacy of detachment in this kind of environment. You can't just observe your way out of trouble.
His pleas to Bryan, it's heartbreaking, he's desperate, and Bryan just ignores him.
It really underscores how vulnerable he is.
And at the end of his perspective, he's left with these impossible choices. Run, join Bryan, hide in the bunker.
None of them sound good.
Ian's fundamental struggle for self-preservation. And the idea of him joining Bryan after all that is really disturbing. It shows how far people will go just to survive.
What compromises would he be willing to make? Would he even be Ian anymore?
Exactly. Now, Mike is a different story. He's finally free of those whispers.
Yeah. Makes a point of highlighting his return to clarity, like it's a victory over the island's manipulation. But then there's this eerie silence he experiences.
Spooky, right. It makes you realize how deeply those whispers had gotten to him.
It's like the constant noise in his head just stopped.
And while everyone else is freaking out, he's just watching.
Makes sense. He's got to process everything after what he's been through.
Right. And then at the end of the chapter, he has to make a choice. Attack Bryan. Help Ian. Stay hidden.
Tough call. I mean, you have to feel for Rosendo, and Ian's in a bad spot. But Mike's still recovering himself.
If he attacks Bryan, it could be seen as resisting the blue corruption, like he's fighting back against the island's influence.
So it becomes more than just a personal grudge. It's about taking a stand.
Yeah. So, given all this, how do you think Ian and Mike will deal with Bryan? And what about the creature?
Well, Ian's options are super limited. He can't run in that condition.
Mm-hmm.
And joining Bryan, I don't see that ending well.
It'd be pure survival at the cost of who knows what. And the bunker, we know that's not safe either.
He's trapped between a rock and a hard place.
What about Mike? What do you think drives his decision?
I mean, if he goes after Bryan, is it for Rosendo? Or is it because he recognizes how dangerous Bryan's become?
Or maybe the island's still messing with him, even though he thinks he's clear. That's a scary thought.
And if he tries to help Ian, how can he even do that? He's got to be weak from the whispers. And what about the creature? It's a huge risk.
Staying hidden might be the smartest move, at least for now. He can observe, gather information, wait for better opportunity.
It's a brutal situation all around. Bryan's changed the whole game, and that creature is a wild card.
Survival isn't just about staying alive anymore. It's about navigating this new power dynamic, making alliances, and choosing your battles.
So that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Nothing Left to Say. And man, that title is just so fitting. The transformations, the betrayals, the deaths.
It's a turning point in the story, and it raises so many questions about what's next for Ian and Mike. How do you survive in a world where power has shifted so dramatically?
And that leads to a final thought for you.
Yeah.
What does survival even mean on this island? Is it enough to just stay alive no matter the cost? Or is there something more you have to hold on to, even when everything's trying to tear you down?
It makes you think about the price of power, the consequences of revenge, and the strength it takes to stay human in the face of the unimaginable.
Have you ever noticed how, when things get really intense, it kind of forces what's hidden inside to come out?
Yeah, like pressure reveals the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the feeling I'm getting diving back into this next part of the story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
We're picking up right where we left off in Chapter 11, going deep into Part 2, The Storm Inside.
Ah, yes, the storm. That was a turning point for sure. It's so much more than just bad weather, though, isn't it? It's like the storm acts as this catalyst, right?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
It amplifies everything that's already bubbling under the surface of the island.
Like all the tension and the weird, energies.
Exactly. So in this part of our deep dive, we're aiming to trace those recurring themes that keep popping up in their experiences.
Like what?
Well, like the insidious way corruption takes hold, that powerful instinct to protect others, the emergence of these new, almost supernatural abilities.
And for one of them, it's the end of the line, right?
Yeah. We're going to be looking closely at what all of this reveals about each of these 5 individuals, how they react, how they change.
All right, so let's start with Cowin.
Sounds good.
The notes on Chapter 11 really focus on how the storm, combined with what Jordanna was doing, just turned up the volume on those manipulative whispers he's been fighting.
Oh, for sure. It's like the island's influence, which usually operates so subtly, in the shadows.
Right.
It becomes almost this physical attack in this supercharged environment created by the storm.
So it's like the storm is weaponizing the island's power in a way.
You could say that. But here's what I find really striking. Right in the middle of this chaos, this absolute onslaught,
Yeah.
Cowin experiences a moment of pure human connection. Boon's instinctive act of shielding him, protecting him. It's a powerful contrast, don't you think?
For sure. It's like the utter darkness of those whispers versus the pure, genuine warmth of that embrace.
You nailed it.
That image of Boon shielding Cowin is just so vivid, so powerful. But even with that connection, Cowin's internal struggle doesn't let up, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's important.
There's that lingering unease, that suspicion he has about Jill's red glow. What do you think that's all about?
I think that constant unease is a key part of who Cowin is at this point. It links directly back to his decision to fight it, as we saw back in Chapter 10.
Right.
Even with all the new threats the storm throws at them, his suspicion, his awareness, it never fades. It shows just how much his past experiences, his own fight against the island, have colored how he sees Jill.
And how he sees the potential danger all around him. So it's like the external drama of the storm mirrors those internal battles each of them is still fighting.
Exactly. It's happening on multiple levels.
Okay, so now let's shift gears and talk about Boon. His perspective in the storm inside is particularly interesting, especially knowing what he just went through trapped under the sand in Chapter 10.
Ugh, that was rough.
He had this totally understandable desire to just disappear, to slip into oblivion, to just not be anymore.
Can you blame him after what he went through? But here's what I find so compelling. It's this immediate shift from wanting to escape to that totally selfless act of protecting Cowin.
It's like a complete 180.
Despite the trauma he's just experienced, and I'm sure he's exhausted, right? Boon's first instinct is to make sure Cowin's safe. That says so much about his character.
Like what?
It speaks to this deep well of compassion he has and this resilience that seems to push back against the island's darkness. It makes you wonder, what is it that drives him to be so selfless in such a brutal place?
That's a great question. It's like, even when he's at his most broken, that core part of him, that need to protect others, it's still there.
It really is. His almost desperate hope in the power of human connection to actually make a difference against the island's bad vibes. You know?
Yeah, that's powerful. Like he's refusing to give in to the darkness.
Right. In a place that's all about manipulation and self-interest, Boon's unwavering belief in the strength of caring for others, of connection, it's almost a revolutionary act.
It's like he's saying, no, we're not going to let the island win.
And then there's this tiny detail that really adds to that, the faint golden light he sees.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's like a little spark of hope, a suggestion that maybe, just maybe, the island's power isn't entirely destructive, that there's a potential for healing there, even in all this darkness.
Yeah, that little glimmer of gold definitely brings a little bit of hope into a very dark situation. Okay, so let's move on to Jill. She seems to be evolving into something, I don't know, different. She's so connected to the island's natural energies, almost like she's becoming this guardian figure.
You're spot on. The storm seems to amplify her connection, allowing her to tap into a deeper level of power than we've seen before.
It's like she's becoming one with the island, but in a good way.
That's an interesting way to put it. And her choice, her deliberate choice to shield her companions instead of attacking Jordanna, that's a huge turning point.
Oh, absolutely.
It shows her focus is on protecting, on defending. It's a different way of approaching power than we've seen from anyone else.
It's like she's not trying to control the island's power, but work with it in a way. And she's using the island's light to heal, right? The analysis talks about that duality of the island.
Right, right.
Yeah.
This capacity for incredible corruption, but also for profound healing.
So how does that tie into her earlier choices, like protecting Andrew, Cowin, and Boon back in Chapter 10? Is there a connection?
I think there is. Looking back, it suggests a pattern. Jill's consistent acts of protecting others, of putting their needs before her own, seem to resonate with a specific aspect of the island's power.
It's like the island is responding to her selflessness.
Yeah, almost like it's rewarding her for it. And that raises a huge question for me.
What is it?
Could Jill's growing abilities be directly connected to her choices?
Why?
And what could the island ultimately have in store for her and the others she's protecting? Is she the key to understanding a different way to interact with this place?
It really makes you rethink the whole nature of the island, doesn't it?
For sure, it's more complex than just being a force of evil. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay, so let's talk about Jordanna. Her experience during the storm inside is wild. And it all leads up to her final moments.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster.
She's feeling this incredible, almost limitless power from the island's dark energy, but it's also super unstable.
You can feel the volatility there. It's almost like the power itself is tearing her apart. But for me, the most interesting thing is this flicker of internal conflict we see when she witnesses Jill protecting the others.
Oh, yeah.
It's this brief glimpse of something we haven't seen from her before, almost like a resistance to those purely hostile impulses that have been driving her.
It's like a part of her old self is still in there, fighting back.
Maybe. Or at least an awareness that there's another way. And then in this final desperate act, she unleashes all that power into the storm.
It's her last stand, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a fleeting moment of agency, of pushing back against the island's control. Even as she's being consumed by these forces, a spark of her own will is fighting to break free.
It's a powerful, but also really sad moment.
Absolutely. Tragically, that moment of autonomy is short-lived. Her sudden and brutal elimination really drives home the absolute and often unpredictable power of the island. It reminds us that even those who wield its power are still subject to its will.
No one is above the island. It's a hard lesson. It's a harsh end for her. Looking back at Jordanna's whole journey, from wanting to survive at all costs in Chapter 7 to these last conflicted moments. What are your thoughts? What stands out to you?
Wow, if we take in her whole story, I think Jordanna's journey really shows us how dangerous it is to chase power on the island, especially if it means compromising your own sense of right and wrong. That initial drive to survive, it twists into this dependence on corrupt power, and in the end, even that can't protect her from the island's judgment.
It makes you think about those crucial moments where things could have gone differently.
Yeah. Was she doomed from the moment she started down that path, or were there real chances for her to change course?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Okay, so let's look at Andrew's experience during all this chaos. He seems to regain some mental clarity, and the analysis connects that to Jill's intervention. It goes back to that sickness she sensed in him before.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It seems like Jill's connection to the island has this purifying effect, at least for some.
Like an antidote to the corruption.
Exactly. And because Andrew's mind is clear again, he's able to see Jordanna's exhausted but unbroken spirit. And they share that unexpected moment of connection right before she's eliminated.
Wow, that's intense.
It really highlights how unpredictable and inexplicable things are on the island. You never know what's going to happen next.
That brief moment of connection in the middle of all that destruction must have been so unsettling for him. And the analysis talks about the deep shock that Andrew and the others experience after Jordanna's sudden end. It really emphasizes the psychological toll of trying to survive in this environment. It's not just the physical dangers they have to worry about.
Definitely not. It's the constant exposure to the island's strange energy, the transformations they're witnessing, the sudden loss of life. It all adds up to this immense psychological burden they're carrying. Jordanna's elimination is just one more trauma that will stay with them, shaping how they see the island and the choices they make.
So we keep seeing this pattern of the island's corrupting influence. We've seen it with Cowin and Andrew. Jill sensed that sickness in both of them, and they're both struggling to resist it.
What's really interesting is how Jill is emerging as this force that counteracts that corruption.
It's like she's the island's immune system.
I like that. She's this force for cleansing and healing, and her abilities stand in stark contrast to the darker influences we've seen. It makes you wonder, what does this back and forth between corruption and cleansing tell us about the island's true nature?
Yeah. Is it all about decay? Or is there some kind of balancing mechanism going on, like good versus evil?
It's a fascinating question. And then you have Boon, who just keeps demonstrating the power of selfless protection.
He really is incredible. He risked his life to save Andrew and Cowin. It's like he's always putting others first.
It's truly inspiring. Boone's actions highlight the strength of empathy and resilience, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. He's been through so much himself, but he constantly prioritizes the safety and well-being of his companions. It makes you think about what drives that kind of selflessness, especially when there's no obvious personal gain. It's a powerful testament to the importance of human connection, even in a place that seems designed to tear people apart.
It's like he's proving that even in the darkest of places, that spark of humanity can still shine through.
Absolutely. And then there's Jill, whose connection to the island seems to be growing stronger and deeper with every passing moment.
She's not just fighting off the bad stuff. She's actively channeling the island's power for healing and protection. What could this mean for her and for the other survivors?
Jill's growing power could change everything. Could she be on the path to truly understanding the island's nature? Could she find a way for them to break free from its darker influences? Or even, maybe, a way to escape altogether?
Escape? Wow.
It's a possibility. Her ability to tap into this seemingly benevolent side of the island's power offers a glimmer of hope in the face of all the corruption we've seen. It raises the possibility that she might hold the key to their survival.
It definitely feels like her role is becoming more and more important as we go along.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the storm inside, we're left with these really powerful takeaways. The constant fight against the island's corruption, the incredible selflessness that Boon embodies, the rise of new and potentially game-changing forces in Jill, and the stark reality of the island's judgment, as we saw with Jordanna's tragic ending.
Yeah. And it leaves us with this one final lingering thought.
What's that?
With Jordanna gone and these forces of destruction and protection intensifying on the island, what's next for the survivors?
Yeah.
How will their choices, their individual choices, shape their destinies in this place where nothing is certain?
We're going deep into chapter 11. All that was taken, remember.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one, especially that section, part 3, rebirth.
That's right. And we're zeroing in on a specific encounter. Graham, Tyfanna, Mayoli, and Peter, all together in this super intense moment. And well, things go down.
To say the least.
Seriously. So we're going to try and really get into each of their heads. You know, like, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Why are they doing what they're doing?
Exactly. It's about trying to understand their individual perspectives in this shared, incredibly charged situation.
Right. All right. So picture this. Graham walks into this chamber.
Right.
He's in the lighthouse. And the first thing we get is this sense of him just stopping. Like he's frozen. But not like scared frozen, more like expectant.
There's this palpable stillness described, this feeling that something is about to happen.
Exactly. And his eyes, they immediately go to Mayoli. It's like she's this grounding presence for him.
Yeah.
And then he sees Tyfanna.
And she is unsettlingly calm, like almost eerily so.
Yeah. It's like a red flag, right? Something's off.
It makes you think about how the island affects everyone so differently. Graham, he's super cautious, always on edge. And then you have Tyfanna, who's almost like she's embraced the weirdness.
Totally. But the thing that really draws Graham's attention is this altar.
Oh, the altar. That's a whole other can of worms.
Oh, right. It's this huge black stone thing. And there are these figures, like trapped inside it. Some of them look like they're screaming. Others are kneeling. Some are reaching up. And it's never really explained, right? Like what happened to them. Were they part of some crazy ritual? Or were they victims? We don't know.
It's intentionally ambiguous, which makes it even creepier. Like, what fate awaits those who interact with this altar?
And Graham, smart guy that he is, right? And he's like, nope, not going near that thing. His gut's telling him to stay away.
That gut feeling has kept him alive so far. It's like he understands the danger, even if he doesn't fully grasp what's going on.
Yeah. So instead of going towards the altar, he looks down, right, at the floor. And what does he see?
2 sets of etchings. 2 very different styles.
Okay, so the first set, these are rough, like they were carved in a hurdy.
Yeah.
And they're filled with blood, fresh blood, which is kind of terrifying, right? Like someone was just here doing this.
Yeah.
And the shapes, they're familiar.
They are. There's the twisted tree, remember that? From the void?
Yeah. And then there's this crescent blade waterfall, but with these, like, red grooves carved into it and a dark oasis underground.
Mm.
And that crazy structure with all the tangled branches and the jagged mouth.
Almost like a trail of breadcrumbs. A map, but in a very visceral language, a language of blood and memory.
Okay, then there's the second set of carvings. These are totally different. They have this faint blue glow to them. And the style is, I don't know, more precise.
Colder, more mechanical, less organic than the first set.
Right. Like someone took their time with these. There's a crater with these sharp lines etched around it, and a cavern filled with crystals, and an engine, like a really complex engine.
And finally, a carving of the lighthouse itself, almost like bringing the map full circle.
Exactly. And Graham starts putting the pieces together. He thinks the red markings, those represent refuge. And the blue ones, they're linked to contamination, to that blue fungus.
It's like he's creating a code of survival.
Right. And he thinks that whatever lies in between, that's the key.
Fascinating how even in this crazy situation, his mind goes to analysis, to figuring things out.
Yeah. And then he notices this trail of blue fungus, right, leading away from the lighthouse carving towards the wall. And then it just goes like up the wall and out of sight.
Adding another layer to the mystery.
So Graham's really focused on this, right, trying to decode it all. And meanwhile, we've got Tyfanna, and her experience is so different.
Oh, completely. For her, the silence in the chamber, it's not oppressive or expectant. It's almost comforting.
Yeah. She describes it as being like a warm fog, and she sees the blue glow, the spores floating around, and it's not scary to her. It's like she recognizes it, almost like she's home.
It's such a stark contrast to Graham's wariness. Remember, Tyfanna has been dealing with those voices in her head, so even this relative silence probably feels like a huge relief.
Right. And that seems to give her a sense of acceptance, like she's not afraid of what's going to happen.
And she even observes Graham, hunched over the carvings, trying to make sense of it all, and she thinks they're lucky to still be whole. A really poignant observation, given her own mental state.
Definitely. It highlights how fractured she feels.
Mm.
And even the figures trapped in the altar, they're not frightening to her anymore. She sees them as just weary, like they stepped into it, whatever it is. And she feels like she's about to do the same thing.
It's like she's resigning herself to some predetermined fate. Like she sees their ending as inevitable, and she's okay with it.
So she walks towards the altar, right? And as she gets closer, she hears this humming sound.
And it's familiar to her. It's the same thrumming she's felt under her skin ever since the whispers started.
Right. And she sees the altar almost as an extension of the blue glow, like it's all connected. And for a moment, she glances back at Graham and Mayoli.
And she notices Mayoli's found a lever.
Yeah. But it's like, Tyfanna doesn't even care. She's so focused on the altar, like that's all that matters now.
It's her moment.
Exactly. And then she sees him, this man, one of the figures in the altar. And he has this serene expression on his face. And she thinks, he's like you.
Who do you think she means?
I don't know. That's what's so intriguing. Is she talking about Peter? Or is it like a broader statement about people who have given in to the island? Or maybe she sees something of us in him. Like we're trying to understand all of this, but we're not really a part of it.
That's an interesting thought.
So she reaches out to the altar. But it's not like she's surrendering, more like she's just tired. And she wants to rest.
And the way it's described is like the altar welcomes her.
Yeah. All the noise in her head starts to fade away. Her thoughts slow down. Even her heartbeat calms. And then a stone hand moves from the altar. It takes her arm and it just pulls her in.
And she doesn't fight it. Not at all.
Not even a little bit. She just breathes out and then she's gone. Still, silent, part of the altar.
It's a powerful image. And the narrative tells us this is her fate now. To be frozen within the altar. To find rest. And somehow this is what allows Peter to come back.
Okay, let's talk about Mayoli. She's been really quiet this whole time.
Steady. Reassuring. A stark contrast to Tyfanna's detached serenity.
Right. And we hear that she's found a lever. So what do you think Mayoli's going to do now? I mean, she's seen what happened to Tyfanna. She knows there's a lever.
Mayoli's always been careful, cautious. I doubt she'll do anything rash.
But she's also practical. Maybe she'll try to figure out what Graham's doing with those carvings. Or maybe she'll just want to get out of there as quickly as possible.
And we can't forget about Peter. He's about to reemerge. And who knows what state he'll be in. That'll definitely influence her actions.
Okay, so let's talk about Peter. Because, wow, his return is something else. At first, he's totally disoriented. He doesn't know where he is or even what he is.
It's like he was somewhere else, existing in a different way.
Yeah. All he can feel is cold, stone, earth, the weight of the altar.
He doesn't have any of his normal senses. No sight, no sound, no breath.
But he knows he's not alone. He can sense another presence with him.
Which again points to the island being this active force, even in these liminal spaces.
And then things shift. He feels this warmth. And he realizes it's Tyfanna's thoughts. And he just knows she's there to finish the circle.
That phrase is really loaded, don't you think?
Totally. Like, what does that even mean? What's circle?
It suggests some kind of exchange, a balance that needs to be restored.
Like her sacrifice is payment for his return.
It's possible. The island seems to operate on a system we don't fully understand.
So Peter's hand starts to move. And the stone around him, it cracks. But it doesn't sound like a violent breaking. It's described as reverent, like it's happening with purpose. And he reaches out, touches Tyfanna's arm, like a silent thank you.
And he calls her family, even though they barely know each other.
I know, it's like this weird bond has formed between them. So he pulls himself out of the stone, right? And everything is so bright, the blue light is blinding. It's all too much for him at first.
He's gone from sensory deprivation to overload.
Right. And he sees Tyfanna. She's being absorbed by the altar.
Yeah.
But it's not like she's being dragged in or pulled. It's more like she's being lifted, like it's a gentle thing. And he just says goodbye to her.
A final farewell.
Yeah. And then he turns and he sees Graham. And his immediate thought is, he's wrong. A problem.
That's so interesting. He doesn't see him as the threat, but he sees him as something that needs to be corrected.
And then he sees Mayoli. And he remembers her from the beginning.
Yeah.
And he senses this sorrow in her.
But he doesn't understand why she's sad.
It's like he's lost a part of his empathy, like he's not fully human anymore.
Something has changed, fundamentally.
Right. And then he gets this message. It's not spoken out loud, but it's clear in his mind. This was not a gift. This is a test. To be chosen is not enough. You must prove you are worth it.
Whoa, chills.
Right. It's like he's been given a second chance, but there's a catch.
It's conditional, and it definitely has a sinister undertone.
Okay, so let's step back for a second. Let's try to imagine this chamber, this place where all of this is happening.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense setting.
It is. So it's in the lighthouse. And it's silent. But not peaceful silence, more like a waiting silence. And there's this constant blue glow coming from the walls. And it pulses, like with every heartbeat.
And those blue spores are just floating around, swirling in the air.
Right. And then there's the altar, this massive black stone thing with the figures trapped inside.
A constant reminder of what might happen to those who get too close.
And then there are the carvings on the floor, the red ones with the blood, and the blue ones, all intricate and precise.
It's a room full of contrasts, life and death, organic and mechanical. Silence and that pulsing light, it's almost otherworldly.
All right, so Tyfanna's gone, at least for now. And Peter's back, but he's different. So what do you think Graham and Mayoli are going to do?
Well, before Tyfanna went into the altar, Graham had a few options. He could try to run, find an escape route, or maybe try to activate a lever.
Oh, right. Mayoli found a lever. Do you think that's connected to the carvings?
Maybe. Or maybe it does something completely different. Who knows?
So he could mess with the lever. Or he could try talking to Peter.
But Peter's not exactly welcoming right now. He sees Graham as a problem.
True. So I think Graham's going to stick with what he knows. He's going to try to figure out those carvings. Especially that door in between that he mentioned. Maybe that's the key to everything. Or at least a way out of there.
It makes sense. He's an analyst at heart. Even in a crisis, he wants to understand.
And what about Mayoli? Do you think she'll try to help Graham? Or just use the lever and get out of there?
She's all about survival. Seeing Tyfanna go into the altar probably freaked her out, so she might be ready to pull that lever and run. Especially with Peter back in the picture. He's a wild card now.
Yeah, he definitely is. And we can't forget that there are other people out there on the island. Other groups. All dealing with their own crazy stuff.
That's right. Chapter 10 and the end of Chapter 11 remind us that this is just one piece of a much bigger story. We've got Andrew and Jill and all the others all fighting their own battles.
It feels like what happened here in the lighthouse going to have ripples.
Definitely. And remember that poem at the end of Chapter 11, All That Was Taken. It's a reminder that everyone's story is connected. What happened to Tyfanna, it might be a foreshadowing of what's to come for the others.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. Tyfanna went into the altar. She's at rest, I guess you could say. And Peter came back. But he's not the same Peter. He's got this new purpose and the sense that he's been chosen for something.
And Graham and Mayoli are left to deal with the fallout, trying to figure out what it all means and what to do next.
And the chamber itself, it's like this focal point for all the weirdness of the island, all those contrasting images and that heavy silence. It's a place of power.
Yeah.
And maybe danger.
It definitely feels like a turning point in the story. Like, things are escalating.
All right, so we've thrown a lot at you today. But here's the thing we want you to think about. What does Tyfanna's choice and Peter's return mean for the other survivors? Is Tyfanna really at peace? Or is something else going on? And what about that code of survival that Graham found? Could that be the key to everything? You know, we really reached a turning point, a boiling point, at the waterfall in part 4, the last stand. Some huge losses there, some real heartbreak, and you could just feel the tension as Mayo, Claudia, Jim, Travis, Jordan, Chris, Andrea, and Chelsea all came together in this place that Claudia, at least, believed was safe, a sanctuary. All these distinct lights, blue, red, gold clashing, and it felt like there was no going back.
Absolutely. It really did feel like a point of no return. So in this deep dive, what we're going to do is try to pick apart those final moments for each of these 8 individuals.
Yeah.
See if we can understand what was driving their actions, what they were grappling with internally, and then ultimately, the consequences of those choices, including the loss of Chris, Andrea, and Travis.
Right. And to really grasp the weight of the decisions they made at the waterfall, we need to kind of rewind a bit and remember the paths they took to get there, to provide that context, that emotional backdrop. So let's start with Mayo. When she first arrived on the island, she was in a really vulnerable state, wasn't she?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That disorientation after the shipwreck, the shock of that storm, it's hard to even imagine. And then the island's influence starts to creep in, those unsettling visions. Remember the bone dust and how disturbing that was. Her bond with Claudia, though, became so crucial for her, that connection, as she felt herself becoming more and more detached from her own instincts. And then what really struck me as they approached the waterfall was this almost reversed perception she had. Like, she felt this need to protect Chris and Jordan, who, as we know, are aligned with that darker energy, against Andrea. It just shows you how insidious the island's influence can be. It can twist your whole sense of who needs help and who's the threat.
It's chilling. It really is, like a complete warping of your internal compass. Now, Claudia's relationship with the island is much deeper, much longer, right?
Right. 15 days before the arrival of the others, the records show. And don't forget that unsettling encounter with Jordan she had at the waterfall. So maybe she already associated that place with a certain kind of power, even though he ended up fleeing from her. But by the time they reach that final confrontation, she's been there 16 days. And her belief in the waterfall's protection is deeply rooted. Throughout the whole thing, her focus is Mayo protecting her. And even when she finds that sense of safety, maybe even a kind of rejuvenation in that golden pool, her first instinct is to go back to Mayo to help her. That speaks volumes about their bond, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. And Jim, his journey has been marked by this terrifying transformation.
Remember that horrifying escape from Travis's transformation in that cavern? That was traumatic, just brutal to witness. And then forming that alliance with Mayo and Claudia that gave him a pathway back to connection, to safety. And then seeing Mayo's increasingly fragile state, coupled with his own experience at the water's pool at the waterfall, that leads him to that profound change in the pool. It's like he rediscovers a strength that he'd lost, or maybe never even knew he had. And it just shows you, even in moments of extreme fear, loss, that potential for transformation, for finding inner strength, can still emerge. It's powerful.
Yeah. Now, Travis's path is a descent into something primal, something really unsettling.
Yeah, stark contrast to Jim, for sure.
Right.
He started out with Jim just searching for basic supplies, right? But that transformation in the cavern was swift and total. He was assimilated into that pack, his own will completely gone, replaced by this blind loyalty to the master. Any memory of that friendship with Jim, that human connection, just wiped away. It's really a chilling portrayal of how easily individual identity can be lost.
Yeah. And Jordan's awakening, it was solitary, right? It kind of set him on this path that ultimately intertwined with Chris's ambition.
Yeah, he wakes up alone, confused. And Chris, he offers Jordan this sense of belonging, of power, which Jordan seemed to crave. And even though he has this unease at the waterfall, that pull of Chris's influence, that feeling of belonging wins out, and he willingly stands against Andrea. It really makes you think about how often people are drawn to charismatic figures, groups, even when their gut is telling them something's not right.
Yeah. Chris, though, he fully embraced the power he found. He saw it as his destiny.
Oh, absolutely. That experience in the Shimmering Cavern, that was the turning point. He didn't just accept the power, he reveled in it. It was his birthright in his mind. Corrupting Jordan, that was a key moment, showing his willingness to manipulate others. And he developed this deep, almost symbiotic connection with the island, with the waterfall. He thought he was unstoppable. Andrea was nothing to him. That unchecked ambition, that belief in his own invincibility, that's a classic recipe for disaster, isn't it? You see it again and again throughout history.
Yeah, really is. Now, Andrea's experiences, her early encounters, were terrifying, but they forged a really unique connection with the island.
They were harrowing, no question. Facing all that alone, it's amazing she survived. But that impulsive leap into the glowing pool, that was the catalyst. It gave her strength, but more than that, it gave her this deep, almost spiritual bond with the island. She saw herself as the island's guardian, the counterforce to Chris's corruption. And that red glow, that was the visual manifestation of her defiance, her link to the island's power. It's fascinating, isn't it? Two individuals drawing power from the same source, but with completely different intentions, outcomes.
It is. It really is. And then there's Chelsea. Her journey's been unlike any of the others. She's exploring these hidden depths of the island.
Right, right. She goes through that subterranean realm, that painful communication with the island's consciousness, the fall into the engine with Peter, and then that transformative experience in the void. And her choice, that gold cloud, it leads her to this disembodied state in the golden pool. But what's important to remember here is in part 4, she's an observer. She becomes aware after the chaos at the waterfall has already started. She's a witness to these final devastating clashes. So her perspective is unique, detached, but potentially really insightful.
Okay, so we've laid out their journeys, their paths. Let's see what each of them went through in those intense moments at the waterfall. Let's start with Mayo. She found herself paralyzed, right?
Yeah, completely immobilized. And those voices returned, those whispers commanding her to stop Chris and Jordan. So she's caught in this brutal internal struggle. On one hand, the island's commands. On the other, her connection to Claudia. And that blue light you see described in her, that's the island trying to regain control. It's that struggle made visible. It just highlights how persistent manipulation can be. Breaking free, even when you have something good to hold on to, it's not easy.
And yet there's this whisper of resistance. She manages to fight back.
It's small, but so significant. But the moment it breaks, the island's hold is when she sees and hears Claudia. That cry of no, that's pure willpower, a rejection of the control. That memory of Claudia, their shared experiences, it proves more powerful than the island's magic. It shows you that human connection, genuine emotion, those can be powerful weapons.
They can. They really can. And then those first steps toward the water, they're described as painful. You can really feel the effort she's putting into breaking free.
Mm-hmm.
Let's switch to Claudia's perspective. She just found some relief in that golden pool.
Yeah, this feeling of warmth, maybe even healing, right? A stark contrast to the danger all around them. But it's shattered when she realizes Mayo is still out there, still vulnerable. And her decision to leave that safety to go back to Mayo, it's instant. She doesn't hesitate. She emerges into this chaotic scene. Chris and Jordan overpowering Andrea, those blue glowing creatures closing in. To risk her own safety like that, it speaks to her character.
And that desperate run toward Mayo, calling out her name.
Mayo! It's pure terror in her voice. And then reaching her, that reassurance in Spanish. Estoy aquí. No te voy a dejar. I'm here, she says. I won't leave you. You can feel that connection. And she sees the struggle in Mayo's eyes, that battle with the island's influence. Their effort to pull Mayo toward the pool, it becomes their only hope.
It does. Now, Jim, after that transformation in the pool, his perspective, his priorities, they shift so dramatically.
Oh, yeah. It's like this surge of fire, of power courses through him. His first instinct, maybe fueled by that, is to jump into the fight, test his limits. But then there's this moment of clarity. He realizes what he owes Claudia and Mayo, and he's ashamed that he even considered his own power before their safety. That internal check is huge. It shows that sense of responsibility, that prioritizing relationships, even when he's been empowered.
And he acts fast to help Claudia reach Mayo.
He does. He sees that flicker of hope in Mayo's eyes, that desperation, and he understands. And then that glimpse of Travis at the edge of the jungle, utterly transformed, hungry. It must have been devastating for Jim, like a punch to the gut.
Yeah. And Travis's perspective, it's chilling to see how completely he's been assimilated.
It's total. Every move, every thought, in sync with the pack, the hunger, that's all he is now. There's that fleeting recognition of Jim described as a thread you shouldn't pull. It's like a tiny piece of his old self is still there. It makes you think maybe complete erasure of identity isn't possible.
But that flicker is gone so fast.
It is. The loyalty to the pack, to the master, it's too strong. He sees the battle, but his focus is Andrea, the red one. She's the enemy. There's a bit of unease when he sees Jim glowing, but then the pack approves of Chris and Jordan, and that's enough for him. Jim's lost in his mind. Andrea's just an obstacle. He can't think for himself. It's a cautionary tale.
It is. Jordan's perspective is really tragic. There's this emptiness in him, even as Chris seems to be winning.
Yeah. Even with Andrea down, Jordan feels nothing, just this void. And those blue glowing creatures, they don't scare him. They reinforce him, his connection to that corrupted power. But then he remembers that impulse he had to help Andrea, and he realizes she held on to herself, her identity, while he let go of his. It's this dawning awareness, a glimpse of what he's become.
That must have been so unsettling for him.
Oh, absolutely. That blue light, it's alien now. And yet, he can't act against Chris. His will is gone. And that look from Andrea, that she still sees him, recognizes him, it causes him so much discomfort, but he looks away. He waits for Chris's order. It's hard to read that and not think about how easily we can lose ourselves chasing power, belonging.
It is. And Chris, he's the complete opposite. He's pure hubris.
He's convinced this is his moment. Andrea's fading light, that's confirmation for him. Jordan's his loyal puppet. And Travis, whatever works, he says about Travis rejoining the pack, he doesn't care. And his words to Andrea, so condescending. He offers her power, but it's hollow. He thinks he's so important.
You really thought he was invincible.
He did. He felt limitless. The island was his. He was about to be crowned king. That anticipation, that coronation moment, and then say goodbye, princess. And then it's over. Classic case of overreaching, Unchecked ambition, thinking you're infallible. It never ends well.
Never does. And Andrea, even when she's weak, you see this incredible strength in her, this connection with the island.
Barely conscious, the cold closing in, but she's not afraid. That connection to the waterfall, to the island, it's unbroken. She takes her pain and turns it into strength. Just present, she says. That's defiance. It's the human spirit.
It is. And that red glow flaring again, it's so powerful.
Right. She sees what Chris has become. He threw away his goodness for power, and then she reaches inward to the island's roots. You're not alone, she says. It's like she becomes something more in that moment, the island's protector. And she returns Chris's attack. Gladly, she says, knowing what it means. And then the whiteout. It shows you the power of selflessness, of connecting to something bigger than yourself.
It does. And Chelsea, she wakes in that golden pool. It's a totally unique viewpoint on this whole thing.
Yeah, it's warmth, golden light, cleansing. She sees Jim and the two women, and then Chris's corrupted power, and then Andrea's golden light rising. That clash, the explosion, it shakes everything. But she's shielded by those golden roots.
She's a witness.
Yeah.
She sees the consequences, but she's not in the fight itself.
Exactly. She sees Chris and those creatures obliterated by Andrea's power. The golden light expands, then fades, and everything's different. She sees Jordan thrown back by the blast, and then silence. This change in atmosphere. She seems to understand what Andrea did. And then she sinks back into that cocoon to reflect, to maybe start something new. It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is. And at the end of the chapter, we also get closure on Rosendo, Jordanna, and Tyfanna, even though we don't see their perspectives in part 4 directly.
Right. The poem, the narration, it fills in their stories. Rosendo's mistake with the bunker door, it costs him his life. Jordanna, she seems to accept her fate, almost like she knew it was coming. And Tyfanna, she finds this disturbing peace in the altar's embrace.
Yeah, but focusing on the last stand, Travis, Chris, Andrea, they all meet their ends.
They do. Travis, fully regressed, is consumed by the explosion with the rest of his pack. Chris, with all that hubris, that certainty, he's destroyed by Andrea. His coronation becomes his downfall. And Andrea, her sacrifice is the most profound. She channels her connection to the island, stops Chris, but at the cost of her own life, it's an act of guardianship, of defiance.
And then Jordan, we don't know what happened to him. Last we see, he's being thrown back by the blast.
That's a big question mark, isn't it? Did he survive? What will that mean? It adds a lot of suspense.
It does. So the big takeaways here, I think, are those internal, external battles, those contrasting forces at play. That blue corruption, Andrea's red defiance, and Chelsea in that golden light. And the sacrifices, they were immense.
Yeah. And we lose 3 more players. Chris, Andrea, Travis. On top of Rosendo, Jordanna, and Tyfanna, the whole landscape has changed. Have you ever felt like, I don't know, like there's this huge unseen force messing with your life and you're just like desperately trying to figure out the rules of the game? You know, maybe even what it wants.
Oh, yeah, totally. That feeling of being up against something powerful you can't even see. Trying to figure out the why behind stuff that just doesn't make sense. I think that's something we all struggle with.
Right. And that's exactly the headspace we're diving into today, Michelle's story. Specifically, Part 5 of Chapter 11, All That Was Taken, where we get her perspective.
That's the one titled Beneath the Lie.
You got it.
Yep.
And this deep dive is going to be like your cheat sheet, your express lane to understanding this really crucial moment for her. And hopefully what it tells us about the whole messed up island situation.
Sounds good to me.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to really unpack this weird mental conversation she has with this disembodied voice.
Like a voice in our head.
Exactly. A voice she can't see or touch. And we want to squeeze every last drop of insight out of it. Like, what does this tell us about who Michelle is becoming? How her view of the island is changing?
And what about this system she's trapped in? What does it even mean?
All good questions. And we'll be pulling mostly from the chapter, but we'll also bring in some of the bigger themes we've talked about before, you know?
Oh, yeah, that whole gold versus blue thing.
Right. So picture this. Michelle's kneeling at the edge of this crater, and it's bathed in this creepy blue light.
Not a good sign, usually.
Nope. And all around her, these freaky fungal veins are like twitching and pulsing, almost like they're alive. It's seriously unsettling.
Yeah, talk about a bad vibe.
And in the middle of all this, she's having this mental conversation with the voice. Can't see it, can't touch it. It's pure mind games.
I bet that's enough to make anyone crack.
Seriously. So let's jump into their conversation. It starts with Michelle saying, I want to understand. Sounds simple enough, right? But I feel like there's more to it, like an edge.
Yeah, you're right. There's this, like, undercurrent. It makes you wonder if she wants to understand so she can fight back or maybe find a way to exploit something.
Exactly. And the voice, oh, it picks up on this right away. It answers her, and it sounds all warm and friendly, but it feels so fake. You know what I mean?
Like a used car salesman. All smiles and promises, but you know something's off.
100%. And it starts complimenting her, telling her how smart she is, how she's not letting the island completely swallow her up. It's almost like it's, I don't know, impressed by her.
Maybe more like intrigue, like she's this fascinating puzzle it's trying to solve.
That's a good way to put it. And Michelle, she doesn't miss a beat. She cuts right through the BS with this amazing question. Why do you care? I love that she doesn't buy into the act for a second.
That's Michelle all over. Always questioning, always suspicious. It's what makes her such a compelling character.
It really is. And the voice, it just chuckles. It's like it finds her skepticism amusing. It even tells her she's close to understanding, but without falling apart. It's like it wants her to walk this tightrope.
Oh, that's so manipulative. Like it's dangling this knowledge in front of her, but only letting her get so close.
Total mind games. And you can tell Michelle's picking up on that. She's not just trying to understand the voice, she's also trying to understand the whole situation.
Yeah, trying to piece together the bigger picture.
Right. So she asks this question. She says, what is this place really? A prison? A game?
She's trying to put a label on it, find a framework she can grasp.
Exactly. She needs something, anything, to help her make sense of this insanity.
Don't we all?
And you know what? The voice actually answers. Straight up tells her, it's a system, and systems need calibration, purging, correction. It's like, whoa, hold on, this isn't just random cruelty. There's a plan here.
A very disturbing plan.
Huh?
It's like this giant machine that needs regular maintenance, but the maintenance involves a whole lot of suffering.
And it gets worse. The voice says to Michelle, you weren't brought here to win, Michelle. You were brought here to clarify. It's like everything we thought we knew about the island just got flipped on its head.
Yeah, it's not about survival, not in the traditional sense. It's like they're lab rats, here to provide data. Or maybe something even weirder.
Seriously, it's
Griff.
so creepy. But here's the thing. While all this is going on, Michelle's not just standing there passively. She's actually doing something. She's pressing her fingers into the soil, and it's causing the roots of the bloodwood tree to stir.
The bloodwood tree, that's the one connected to the island's natural energy, right?
Yep. And it seems to have a special bond with Michelle. But here's the thing. It's not attacking. It's more like, I don't know, it's creating a shield around her.
Like she's using it to mask her true intentions.
Exactly. And the description says she's making herself small in the wrong ways, large in the right ones. It's like she's playing with perception. She's using her connection to the island's power to manipulate the voice.
That's some next level strategy right there.
No kidding. But then things take a turn. Out of nowhere, there's this soundless scream that seems to split the air. The ground groans. That creepy blue light flares up like crazy. It's sensory overload moment.
Like everything's going haywire.
Total chaos. And we know that blue light usually means bad news. And guess what? Michelle feels it. She specifically feels Andrea's light breaking and scattering. And it's like Michelle's feeling the island itself in pain, like it's all connected somehow.
Whoa, like some kind of shared consciousness.
Maybe. But here's where it gets really interesting. The voice, the one that's supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing, it actually stumbles. Like it loses its footing for a
Yeah,
second.
that's a huge deal.
Right. It means it's not totally immune to what's happening. It's connected to the island and the survivors in a way we didn't realize.
Maybe it's not as invincible as it wants them to believe.
Maybe not. And in that brief moment of disruption, Michelle has a vision, a flash of true insight. And it's a lot to take in.
Like what? Spill the tea.
Okay, so she sees this history of the island, how it's been shattered and regrown over and over again.
Like a cycle of destruction and rebirth.
And she sees all these people, thousands of them, brought there over lifetimes. The turning, the breaking, the devouring. It's dark.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
But the biggest thing she sees, the thing that really changes everything, is a door.
A door. Like a way out.
That's what it seems like. It's buried deep underground. It's described as being different from anything else on the island.
So not just a way out of a room, but maybe a way out of the whole system.
That's the question, isn't it? And it's huge. It means there might actually be a way to escape this nightmare.
Talk about a game changer.
But before we can even process that, the voice is back. And it's pissed. It says, you shouldn't have done that. No more Mr. Nice Guy.
It's like it's totally freaked out that she saw something she wasn't supposed to.
And Michelle, she's so quick on her feet. She just plays innocent. She says, I didn't do anything. I just listened. As if she wasn't using the bloodwood to pry open the island's secrets.
She's learning how to play the game.
She's a fast learner. And as she walks away from the crater, the bloodwood is humming behind her, stronger than before, like it's proud of her.
Like it's saying, you go, girl.
And in that moment, Michelle has this realization. It hits her. The voice isn't a god. It's a warden. A conductor, a liar. It's been playing them all along.
That's the powerful moment. She's seeing through the facade.
And her final thought in that scene is this. She is no longer part of the voices system. It's like a declaration of independence.
She's breaking free.
So let's take a step back and really analyze what we just saw. Michelle's not messing around. She's playing this strategic game, feeding the voice half-truths, using the bloodwood to hide her true intentions. It's impressive.
She's a mastermind in the making.
And it's a huge difference from the Michelle we met at the beginning. Remember how reactive she was, always trying to fit in? This is a completely different Michelle.
She's gone from follower to leader.
Totally. And her connection to the island, especially the bloodwood, is just getting stronger. She felt Andrea's pain. It's like they're all linked on some deeper level.
Like a network.
Right, and she didn't trust the voice for a second. From the very first question, she was suspicious. She's got a good head on her shoulders.
Always questioning, always pushing back.
And her motivations have changed too. In the beginning, it was all about survival. But now it's about understanding. And maybe even escape.
It's given her a new goal.
Okay, so zooming out, what does all this mean for the island, for the other survivors? This feels like a turning point, a shift in the power dynamics.
Agreed. The voice calling the island a system, that tells us a lot. It's not random. There's a purpose behind the suffering.
A messed up purpose, but a purpose nonetheless.
And that door, that's a game changer. It means escape might actually be possible. And it gives the survivors something to fight for.
Hope.
Exactly. But we also know the voice is a liar. We can't trust anything it says anymore.
It makes you wonder how much of what they've been told is actually true.
It throws everything into question.
And Michelle, with what she now knows, she's a serious threat to the voice's control. She could rally the other survivors, lead a rebellion.
She's a wild card.
Big time. And her power, the red stuff from the bloodwood, that's gotta be important. Especially against the blue light and whatever the voice represents, it's like a whole other layer to this conflict.
The island's natural defense system, maybe?
Could be. And the fact that she felt Andrea's light breaking, it shows how connected they all are. What happens to one affects them all.
Like a web of fate.
So where does Michelle go from here? The excerpt ends with her walking away, but she's got some big choices to make.
Let's break it down. Option 1, strike now. The voice was vulnerable. Maybe she could use that to her advantage.
Hit it while it's down.
But it's risky. It could backfire big time.
Option 2, lay low. Use what she knows to find other survivors, build an alliance, and plan a more strategic attack.
Strength in numbers.
Definitely. Or option 3, play along, pretend she doesn't know anything, and try to learn more from the voice. Find out where that door leads.
Risky, but potentially very rewarding.
It's a tough call. Each option has its own pros and cons.
Think about what we know about Michelle, and think about the bigger picture. What's best for everyone?
This whole situation is a minefield.
And Michelle's right in the middle of it.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really dug deep into Michelle's encounter with the voice, what it revealed about the island, and what it means for her future.
We saw her transform from a follower to a leader, someone who's not afraid to challenge the powers that be.
She's a force to be reckoned with.
And we also learned that there might be a way out of this nightmare. That silver door offers a glimmer of hope.
Though we still don't know what lies beyond it.
And that, my friend, is the million-dollar question. What do you think is the true purpose of the island? And what will Michelle find when she opens that door?
It's a mystery that keeps us coming back for more.
And we'll be back next time, ready to dive into the next chapter of this crazy story. Thanks for listening.